In the 1930s, the American Johnny Eck, born in 1911 in Baltimore without the use of his legs, became an attraction in Freaks by Todd Browning, alongside the dwarf Angelo Rossitto. Coming from curiosity shows and circuses, he also played a half-bird creature in the Tarzan movies and even worked with music, painting, magic tricks, and puppet theater for the public. In December 1952, at the Bertram Mills Circus in London, the audience sees the gorilla Elvira escape from the ring. Clowns run, a pretend hunter tries to control her, and she charges at a frightened spectator. The gorilla is just a performer in a costume, and this mix of fear and humor defines the post-war circus and becomes one of its most talked-about acts. At the beginning of the 20th century, many circuses used duos with extreme contrasts, like the fat guy and the thin guy, to stage mock boxing matches. It wasn't real sport. It was physical comedy, planned punches, exaggerated falls, and easy laughs that turned the ring into a stage and made the audience feel like part of the show, keeping the trend of comic boxing alive. In 1945 in Frita, Colorado, the farmer Lloyd Olson went out to butcher a chicken and accidentally created a legend, Mike the Rooster, who lived for 18 months after being decapitated. Fed with a dropper, he became an attraction at fairs across the U.S., while newspapers and curious onlookers tried to understand how he was still standing. Only later did tests reveal that part of his brain was still active. At the beginning of the 20th century, Bertram Mills's circus mixed glamour, acrobatics, and a parade of bodies treated as rare. Doctors were called in to examine these people as curious cases, while advertising invented figures like the giraffe neck woman to keep the audience hooked on the show and give science a spectacle that also made headlines. In 1965, in a packed circus in Munich, the former tamer Kara Kawak walked into the arena with 2 crocodiles and, in front of a silent audience, made them stay as still as stone. It was a time when the circus pushed the limits of fear, with the smell of sawdust, cigarette smoke, and the feeling that nothing was more important than that moment, a kind of courage many never forgot. At a time when the circus was the big event of the week, Ella Harper, born in 1870 in Tennessee, drew attention for walking on her hands and feet because of a rare knee condition. In 1886, she became a star of the Nickel Plate Circus and earned $200 a week, enough money to change the fate of an ordinary girl and remind everyone how fast the world was changing. In the first half of the 20th century, contortionists were a guaranteed attraction at circuses and traveling fairs. Advertised as rubber bodies, they trained from an early age to bend bones and muscles beyond the ordinary, blending theater with a touch of mystery that left the audience hypnotized, unsure whether they were watching a trick or the real limits of the human body under the big top. At the end of the 19th century, fairs and circuses in the United States set up tents just for human curiosities: dwarfs, giants, strong people, or anyone with unusual talents. Whole families would go, laugh, get amazed, and talk about it for weeks, surrounded by colorful posters, bright lights, and loud music, paying to look at the unusual while the owners counted their profits. In 1844, the Belgian Charles Bonnier portrayed the boy Charles Sherwood Stratton, the future General Tom Thumb, at about 12 years old. With his growth halted by dwarfism, he was already P.T. Barnum's big bet, sold as a living miracle in a world that was beginning to turn people into spectacle. The tours and audiences showed how much people were willing to pay to see someone different. Prince Randian, born in 1871 in what was then British Guiana, spent his life in circuses in the U.S., where he was seen both as an attraction and a symbol of resilience. Without arms or legs, he lit cigarettes, wrote, and appeared in the 1932 film Freaks. Today, his story still sparks debate about exploitation, respect, and how performers with disabilities were treated at the time. Back at the end of the 19th century, in Victorian England, the story of Edward Mordrake appeared, a young English nobleman who was said to have been born with a second face on the back of his head. They claimed this face laughed when he cried and whispered horrible things at night. Edward supposedly begged doctors for surgery. No one agreed, and the legend says he ended up taking his own life at 23. Born in 1862 in England, Joseph Merrick grew up watching his own body change in frightening ways, until he was exhibited at fairs as the Elephant Man. Humiliated but with no other way out, he eventually caught the attention of the doctor Frederick Trevis, who brought his story to the hospital and to the world, revealing the loneliness and fear behind that extreme appearance. In the 1940s, the Dutchman Arnold Gerrit Henskes, who took the name Mirandejo, shocked audiences by letting assistants pierce his chest with swords. Doctors took him to a hospital in Zurich, took x-rays, and still couldn't explain how he walked away almost without bleeding. To this day, many people debate whether it was an elaborate trick or an extraordinary kind of endurance. At the turn of 1927, Daisy and Violet Hilton, twins joined at the hip and born in 1908 in England, were already crossing oceans on circus and vaudeville tours. Shown at fairs since they were babies and forced to train in singing, dancing, and instruments, they became attractions in the U.S., while managers decided how much each step they took on stage was worth, and they dreamed of some freedom. Born in 1876 in the village of Ossendrecht in the Netherlands, Johanna Pauline Musters became known as Princess Pauline. About 60 centimeters tall, she traveled across Europe and made it to New York, drawing curious crowds at the end of a century obsessed with shows featuring anything outside the norm. She died young in 1895, but her name lived on in record books. Born in 1874 in northern India, Lalu Rampersad grew up with the incomplete remains of a twin attached to his chest, an almost unique case in medical records. Still young, he joined circuses and sideshows, traveled with P.T. Barnum, and turned his own body into his work, asking the audience to see wonders, not monsters. For many, seeing Lalu meant confronting the idea of normality. In 1938, the German Martin Lorello, already living in the U.S., became an attraction at fairs, circuses, and Sam Wagner's freak show in Coney Island. Called the Owl Man, he shocked the audience by turning his neck to face the crowd from behind, at a time when the country packed amusement parks in search of bizarre novelties. Bodies outside the norm were guaranteed business for circus owners. In 1914, Frank Lentini was already filling tents across America. A Sicilian born in 1889, he came into the world with part of a twin attached to his body and ended up with 3 functional legs. Still a boy, he crossed the Atlantic with his family and found a place in major circuses like Ringling Brothers, becoming a regular attraction and a topic of conversation in every town, drawing audiences curious about bodies outside the norm. Born in 1868 in Tennessee, Josephine Myrtle Corbin had a rare malformation, dipygus, which gave her 2 pelvises and 4 legs. At 13, she became an attraction as the 4-legged girl from Texas, filling circuses. Later, she married James Clinton Bicknell, had 5 children, and lived quietly in rural Texas, a story that still amazes people today. Around 1890, Fannie Mills, famous for her enormous feet in Ohio, was a guaranteed presence at fairs and curiosity circuses. Milroy disease made her legs and feet grow uncontrollably, and that drew crowds. Her story shows how, in an era when medicine was still in its infancy, many people with rare conditions became paid entertainment in the United States. In 1811, 2 boys were born joined at the chest in Siam, what is now Thailand. Years later, Chang and Eng Bunker crossed oceans being exhibited in shows, earned money, and bought land in North Carolina. There they became farmers, married 2 sisters, and raised 21 children, trying to live like any other American family in the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, the performer Unzi, born in New Zealand and marketed by circuses as the Australian Aboriginal Beauty, crossed oceans with Barnum and Bailey. His albinism and huge white hair sold tickets and made headlines, while he was simply trying to make a living in a world that treated him more as a curiosity than a person, something common at the time. George and Willie Muse were born on a farm near Roanoke, Virginia, at the end of the 19th century. Albinos, they were taken as boys by a man who hunted for circus phenomena and thrown into shows around the country, advertised as men from Mars. Years later, their mother found them in the Ringling Show and fought in court so they would finally be paid for the years of exploitation. In 1864, in the village of San Carlos in Mexico, Lucia Zarate was born, and she never grew beyond about half a meter in height. As an adult, she weighed just over 2 kilos and became an attraction in circuses like Barnum's. She was promoted as the lightest woman in the world, a symbol of how the 19th century turned rare bodies into business and entertainment for curious crowds. Born in 1906 in Denver, Jacob Reuben Ehrlich, known to the public as Jack Earl, grew so much because of a pituitary tumor that he ended up being billed as the Texas Giant on posters. He acted in silent films, spent 14 years traveling around the country with the Ringling Circus, and later became a well-known traveling salesman at a time when the circus was the big family outing. Around 1890, Reverend Evans, a pastor in Maryland, became known as the man with a hole in his chest. He showed the opening in his torso to doctors and curious onlookers at a time when curiosity turned into spectacle, and he used the pulpit to talk about faith and face the fear of mortality. Many people walked away wondering how he was still alive. Around 1900, Felix Werle, born in Wisconsin, became an attraction in circuses and dime museums in the U.S. He stretched his skin and bent his fingers backward in front of the audience at a time when people talked about freak shows without hesitation. Today, it's believed he had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and his condition became his family's livelihood through many decades on the road. At the turn of the 19th century, Fedor Adrianovich Jevtichuk, a Russian with hypertrichosis, became a sensation as Jojo the dog-faced boy in P.T. Barnum's circuses. From an early age, he traveled across the U.S. and Europe, sold as a wild child found in a cave, but behind the scenes he was an ordinary worker trying to live with dignity and pay the bills in a world that saw his appearance as entertainment. Annie Jones was born in Virginia in 1865, and at just a few months old, was already in P.T. Barnum's show as the Esau baby. She grew up traveling around the country in curiosity circuses, eventually becoming the most famous bearded woman in the U.S. She earned so much that people said she made more than the president, and as an adult she began to question whether that world was art or just the exploitation of her image.